The knock came just as the late afternoon light stretched across my hardwood floor, sharp and golden like it was trying to warn me. My hands went cold before I even reached the door, because some part of me already knew peace was about to be broken. When I opened it, the air shifted. The quiet I had fought for felt suddenly fragile, like glass under pressure. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt your stomach drop before something went wrong, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Stories like this happen more often than we admit. They stood there assuming ownership, eyes moving past me, already measuring what they thought belonged to them. I could hear my own heartbeat louder than the wind outside, louder than the years of silence that had kept me safe. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I stepped aside and let them walk in. That was the moment everything I built was put to the test. I was standing alone in my kitchen, listening to the quiet I had fought decades to earn, when I felt it disappear. The knock came without warning, heavy and familiar, and my body reacted before my mind did. My chest tightened, my hands went cold, and I knew my son had found me. I am 61 now. I live simply, far from the noise, after a lifetime of being needed more than I was ever cherished. This place was not an escape. It was something I built slowly, carefully, after years of fixing, providing, and being forgotten. When I opened the door, I did not feel joy. I felt calculation in the air, the same old weight of expectation settling into my bones. He had not come to ask how I was. He had not come to understand my life. He had come because he believed there was something here for him. Standing there, with the quiet breaking around me, I understood this moment was not about reunion. It was about ownership. Before the day ended, everything demanded naming. I spent most of my life being the person everyone leaned on. I worked long hours, came home tired, and still found myself solving problems that were never really mine. I raised a child, kept a household running, and learned how to stretch myself thin without complaining, because that was what love looked like to me then. Somewhere along the way, being dependable replaced being seen. People called when something broke, when money ran short, when emotions overflowed. They rarely called to ask how I was holding up. I learned to answer before anyone finished asking. I learned to stay quiet about my own needs, because silence kept the peace. I told myself this was strength. I told myself that being needed meant I mattered. But slowly, the weight added up. I felt invisible even in rooms where I was essential. I felt valued only when I was useful, and forgotten the moment I stopped giving. There was no single breaking point, just years of small realizations that settled in my chest. Love that depends on sacrifice alone is fragile. Care that never looks back eventually hollows you out. That understanding did not make me angry. It made me tired. And in that quiet exhaustion, I began to imagine a life where my worth did not depend on what I could provide. It was the first time I considered choosing solitude, not as punishment, but as protection. And that thought slowly guided me toward building something quiet, intentional, and finally my own, far from expectations I never agreed to carry. I built this life quietly, without announcements or explanations. I woke each morning to air that felt clean, to rooms that held only what I needed, and to a silence that no longer felt lonely. After years of carrying noise that was never mine, the stillness felt like relief settling into my bones. My days became simple by choice. I cooked slow meals, tended small routines, and learned how to sit with my thoughts without rushing away from them. There was no audience here, no one measuring my worth by output or sacrifice, just steady mornings, long afternoons, and evenings that ended when my body said it was time to rest. I did not tell people where I went or why. Leaving without explanation was not an act of anger. It was self-preservation. I needed space where I did not have to justify my boundaries or explain my exhaustion. Some assumed I had found money, success, or comfort. They mistook peace for wealth and quiet for indulgence. What they never saw was that this place was never about hiding. It was about building something honest. The calm was real, but it was not empty. It held intention, care, and room for more than just me. And that was why the sound of a car pulling up that day felt so wrong. Entitlement does not knock gently. It arrives believing it already belongs to spaces I thought were finally safe. When my son stepped inside, he did it like the space already belonged to him. His confidence filled the doorway before his body did, and his wife followed close behind, scanning the room the way people do when they are calculating value. They did not ask if they could come in. They moved as if permission had already been granted. I felt the old pattern wake up inside me, the assumption that I would adjust, that I would make room, that whatever I had built would automatically become available to them. My jaw tightened, but I said nothing. I watched their eyes linger on details, measuring comfort, estimating worth, already deciding how this place could serve them. Their presence was loud, even without words. Familiar, too. I recognized the posture, the impatience beneath politeness, the quiet expectation that I would explain myself, that I would justify how I lived, why I lived here, and what I planned to give back. A part of me wanted to stop them at the door. Another part understood something deeper. If I challenged them now, they would never really see me. They would only see resistance. So I stepped aside. I let them walk in. I let their footsteps echo across the floor. I let them believe they were getting closer to something they could claim, not because I was weak, but because I wanted the truth to meet them head on. There was a wall inside this home they had not noticed yet, and once they did, nothing they believed would survive unchanged. I let them walk deeper until the hallway opened into the main room, and that was when everything slowed. Their attention fixed on the wall at the far end, covered in framed photographs, each one placed with care. Faces stared back at them, calm, strong, alive. And then the confusion set in. I watched their eyes search for something familiar, a childhood memory, a family marker, proof of inheritance. But the space where those images should have been was empty. The absence was loud. It pressed against the room harder than any argument ever could. In that moment, I knew the wall was doing the work for me. I did not need to defend myself or explain my choices. What was missing told the truth more clearly than words ever would. Legacy is not guaranteed by blood. Belonging is not automatic. The longer they stood there, the more uncomfortable the silence became. Their assumptions had nowhere to land. They had come expecting to see themselves reflected back as the center of my life, as the natural continuation of everything I had built. Instead, they were confronted with a reality they had never considered. I felt steady, not triumphant, certain. This wall represented years of intention, of care given freely and returned with respect. It held the story of who mattered here and why. As I stepped closer, I understood it was time to speak. The images had opened the door. Now I would finally explain what this place truly was and why those faces belonged here. Nothing about this moment was accidental, and I could feel the balance shifting, slow, inevitable, and impossible for them to undo from now on. I did not build this place for escape. I built it because I finally understood what dignity requires. After years of being used up, I wanted to create something where people were not rescued, but respected. This home exists for women who arrived carrying fear instead of luggage, Some came after abuse, some after betrayal, some after simply being erased by families who only valued them when they were convenient. Here, no one is saved by charity alone. Everyone contributes. Everyone learns. Everyone earns their footing back one honest day at a time. The work matters. The routines matter. Cooking together, cleaning together, growing food, learning skills. Healing is not passive here. It is built through responsibility and mutual care. That is why this place feels different. It is not soft because it is fragile. It is strong because it is shared. Standing there, I realized how sharp the contrast was. My son saw comfort and assumed entitlement. These women saw safety and met it with effort. They asked for help without demanding control. They showed up without expecting to be served. For the first time, I felt no urge to justify myself. I did not need approval for choosing dignity over obligation. This place was proof enough of who I had become. There was no anger left, only alignment. The values I lived by were finally visible, not argued. In that room, surrounded by quiet strength, I felt rooted in a life that answered me back with integrity and a sense of belonging I had never known before until this moment. And in that clarity, something shifted. I understood that family was no longer a title I owed by blood. It was a commitment I chose through presence, respect, and shared work. I was ready to choose it fully. When the insult landed, it was quiet but sharp. It was not aimed at me. It was aimed at the women who had trusted this place enough to rebuild themselves inside it. That was when the anger rose, fast and protective, the kind that does not scream but steadies the spine. I felt years of restraint fall away, not into chaos, but into clarity. I saw the line that had been crossed, and I knew it could not be stepped back over. Respect is not negotiable. Presence is not optional. Anyone who treats dignity as disposable forfeits their place in my life. In that moment, the decision made itself. I chose the people who showed up. I chose the ones who worked, healed, and gave back without entitlement. I chose the women who stood beside me, not because they needed me to survive, but because we had built something honest together. This choice was not loud. It did not require permission or explanation. It settled into me with calm certainty. Family, I understood then, is not a title inherited by blood. It is a relationship sustained by care, accountability, and respect. I did not feel regret. I felt alignment, the kind that comes when your actions finally match your values. Whatever came next, I was prepared to face it without apology. And as I stood there, grounded and clear, a question surfaced that refused to be ignored. If this visit was not about reconciliation, then why had my son really come at all? The answer would change everything I believed. I began to notice the gaps in their story, the urgency without explanation, the confidence that did not match their circumstances. It felt familiar, like many moments before when truth arrived wrapped in assumption. I replayed the details quietly, the sudden visit, the way their eyes measured space instead of asking questions, the careful avoidance of anything emotional. It was not reconciliation they were after, it was relief. The picture sharpened as I stood there. Business trouble, debt, decisions made without foresight. They had come believing I would absorb the consequences the way I always had, that I would soften, fix, and provide without being asked directly. What surprised me was not the need, it was the expectation. Once again, my role had been assigned without my consent. Their silence carried more honesty than any explanation ever could. I felt disappointment, but not devastation. This was confirmation, not revelation. It fit the pattern of a relationship built on convenience rather than care. I had been useful, not known. There was no rush of blame toward myself. I did not fail by outgrowing this dynamic. I simply saw it clearly now. Love that only appears when resources run dry is not love at all. Standing in that clarity, I understood the visit had reached its end. The truth had settled, and with it came the calm certainty that it was time to draw a boundary and finally protect what I built. I took a breath before I spoke, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted my voice to match my resolve. Boundaries are not weapons. They are frameworks, and this place survived because its rules were clear. Anyone who stayed here contributed. They worked. They learned. They respected the people around them. No one arrived with suitcases and expectations, believing history or blood entitled them to comfort. This was not a refuge for avoidance. It was a community built on responsibility. I understood, in that moment, that making exceptions would undo everything. One compromise would tell everyone watching that respect was optional. I would not trade integrity for the illusion of peace. There was no anger in me as I drew the line, only certainty. I knew exactly what I was protecting and why. The life I built required honesty, effort, and humility. Anything less did not belong here. Setting that boundary felt like releasing a weight I had carried for decades. I accepted that this choice would end our relationship as it had existed. I accepted the loss without bitterness. What surprised me was how calm I felt afterward. When you finally stand on truth, there is nothing left to argue, but clarity often provokes resistance. I could feel it gathering across the room, sharp and defensive, ready to push back, and I knew the response to my boundary would reveal everything that still needed to be faced. The calm before that reaction told me the hardest part of this reckoning was about to begin for all involved. When I set the boundary, something hardened in the room. The patience I had offered was met with contempt, and it did not take long for that contempt to turn outward. One of the women returned from town carrying supplies, moving carefully, quietly proud of what she had rebuilt. The dismissal that followed was casual and cruel, aimed at her effort, her worth, her right to stand there. It was the kind of harm people inflict when they believe themselves superior. My body reacted before my thoughts did. Heat rose in my chest, sharp and protective, and every instinct I had as a mother and as a builder surged forward. This was no longer about me being challenged. This was about someone being demeaned inside a place meant to restore dignity. I stepped forward without raising my voice. Around me, the women did not speak, but they moved closer. Their presence formed a quiet wall of solidarity, steady and unafraid. No one needed to argue. The truth was visible in who stood together. In that silence, the last doubt fell away. Reconciliation requires respect, and respect had been forfeited. What stood before me was not misunderstanding, but character revealed. I felt no conflict as the decision settled. The line had been crossed, and there was only one thing left to do. I turned inward and would ask them to leave. I paused before acting, letting the stillness settle. There was no shaking in me, no need to explain. The decision had already been made, and it felt clean. I told them they needed to go, not with anger, but with certainty. This was no longer a place they could stay. Not today. Not ever. I did not raise my voice or justify my reasons. Boundaries do not require persuasion. As they gathered their things, the room felt strangely quiet, not tense, just empty of conflict. I watched them move through a space they had never truly entered, carrying expectations that no longer had anywhere to land. When the door finally closed, the air shifted. It was immediate. The house felt lighter, as if it had exhaled. I felt it too, deep in my chest. a release I did not know I was holding back. The women stood nearby, calm and steady. No one celebrated. No one needed to. What mattered had been protected. That night, the silence returned, but it was different than before. It was grounded, earned. I understood that some endings do not come with noise or regret. They come with relief and room to grow. I did not know exactly what the future would look like, only that this moment would shape it. Time would pass. Forward. 2 years have passed since that door closed, and the life that followed grew quietly, the way healthy things do. The land expanded first, where there were once a few small cabins. There are now more, spaced wide enough for privacy, close enough for community. Gardens stretch farther each season, feeding us and neighbors nearby. The women grew, too. One learned a trade and now works full-time in town. Another manages our finances with care she once believed she did not deserve to trust herself with. Others teach newcomers how to stand steady, how to ask for help without shame, how to give it without losing themselves. Healing here looks like participation, not rescue. My own days settled into rhythm. I wake early, walk the grounds, listen. I am no longer exhausted by proving my worth. I feel useful, yes, but also valued. That difference changed everything. There has been no contact from my son. The silence is noticeable, but it is not painful. It simply exists, like a closed chapter that no longer asks to be reread. I do not measure my life against what is missing. I measure it by what remains. This place answers me back every day with consistency and respect. It has become stable, resilient, alive. And then one morning, in the middle of an ordinary routine, something unexpected arrived. A message from the past, waiting quietly, asking for attention I was no longer sure I owed. I stood there holding the phone, breathing slowly, knowing that whatever I chose next would test the peace I had earned and reveal whether silence could remain an act of love without reopening wounds I had healed. I saw the message late in the afternoon, resting on my phone like it had always belonged there. After 2 years of silence, his name still carried weight, but it no longer carried urgency. I noticed my body first. No spike of fear, no rush of hope, just a steady awareness of what that door used to cost me. I sat with it, breathing, letting the moment pass without forcing meaning onto it. So much had changed. I had learned what peace feels like when it is protected. I had learned that growth does not require revisiting every wound, and that forgiveness does not always need conversation. I read the message once. I did not answer. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because I no longer needed to explain myself to be whole. Silence, this time, was not avoidance. It was completion. Some relationships end loudly. Others end when the lesson is learned and nothing more is required. I set the phone down and returned to my day, grateful for the life waiting around me. Later, I understood that peace means loving without reopening doors from the past. I used to think strength meant enduring whatever love demanded. I believed family was something you survived, not something that held you. This journey taught me otherwise. There was no revenge in my choices, no victory parade. Peace arrived quietly when I stopped explaining myself and started honoring what felt right. Boundaries were not walls meant to punish. They were doors that finally allowed love to move both ways, or not at all. Family, I learned, is not guaranteed by blood. It is built through presence, respect, and the willingness to show up without taking more than you give. Sometimes the people who share your values stand closer than the people who share your name. If you are listening to this and feel torn between obligation and self-respect, I see you. If you have been labeled difficult for protecting your peace, you are not alone. Choosing yourself is not abandonment. It is honesty. I am grateful you stayed with me through this story. Your time, your attention, your empathy matter more than you know. Stories like this live because they are shared, carried, and recognized in others. If this resonated with you, I invite you to reflect. Where have you confused endurance with love or silence with cruelty? I would love to hear what this journey stirred in you. Leave a comment, share your truth, and let us remind each other that healing is possible and peace is something we are allowed to choose. Thank you for listening and for honoring your own quiet courage as you move forward today.